Have you ever felt like the world moved on, but left you behind? There are moments in life when even breathing feels heavy, when memories turn into wounds and silence becomes your only friend. In those quiet hours, the heart aches in ways no one can see. This isn't just sadness, it's the weight of everything unspoken. If you're carrying pain you can't explain, this space is for you. You're not alone. Let this be a voice for your silence. This is your in-depth Part 1. Welcome to FutureWay, Part 1, The Spark of Fire, 2025 India-Pakistan conflict begins. Welcome to FutureWay, where truth unfolds from the eye of the storm. Today, we open the first chapter of one of the most dangerous modern-day escalations between two nuclear-armed neighbors, India and Pakistan. What began as a targeted act of terror soon snowballed into a full-blown geopolitical and military crisis that stunned the global community in 2025. This is not fiction. These are real-world events. Let's dive into Part 1, The Spark of Fire. On the morning of April 23, 2025, the serene landscapes of the Baisaran Valley near Pahalgam, nestled in Jammu and Kashmir, became the epicenter of unspeakable horror. What was supposed to be a tranquil vacation for families turned into a bloodbath. A well-orchestrated terrorist attack struck a group of tourists traveling in the region. In total, 27 innocent lives were lost, including 25 Hindu pilgrims, a Christian visitor, and one local Muslim civilian. More than 80 others were injured. The attack was brutal, indiscriminate, and calculated to provoke. For a moment, the entire nation held its breath, and then it roared in anguish. India quickly identified the attackers as members of the Resistance Front, TRF, a group that had previously operated in the shadows but was known to have ties with Lashkar-e-Taiba, a UN-designated Pakistani-based terrorist organization. TRF took responsibility for the killings via encrypted telegram messages and obscure social media channels, claiming it was retaliation for the Indian military's actions in the Kashmir Valley. But India's intelligence agencies saw through this facade. Evidence gathered through satellite imagery, mobile intercepts, and defectors pointed toward a more sinister picture: the involvement of Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, in sponsoring and directing the attack. Within hours, India's National Security Council convened a high-level emergency meeting. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, flanked by defense officials, intelligence chiefs, and military commanders, declared the attack an act of state-sponsored terrorism. The cabinet resolved unanimously to initiate a multi-layered response, diplomatically, militarily, and economically. The world waited with bated breath. India's first response was diplomatic but severe. All Pakistani diplomats were expelled from Indian soil within 48 hours. Indian envoys in Islamabad were recalled. Visa facilities for Pakistani nationals were suspended. Border crossings were sealed, including the Wagah Atari point and road links in Rajasthan and Gujarat. India formally declared a downgrade of diplomatic relations, invoking a rarely used clause under the Vienna Convention. Next came the water gambit. In a move unseen since the treaty's inception in 1960, India announced the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, a historic water-sharing agreement brokered by the World Bank. Indian officials justified the move by pointing to security loopholes, arguing that no nation could be expected to supply water to a country that was actively sponsoring terrorism. The announcement reverberated across global diplomatic corridors as environmental and military analysts warned of its potential to destabilize the region. On the military front, India moved fast but with precision. Satellite surveillance over the line of control, LOC, intensified. Border Security Force and Indian Army units in Jammu and Kashmir were put on high alert. The Air Force deployed Sukhoi Su-30 MKIs and Rafale jets to forward air bases. Drone patrols over Poonch, Rajouri, and Kupwara sectors began capturing real-time activity. India's army chief publicly stated, "We will respond at a time and place of our choosing. But rest assured, we will respond." Meanwhile, inside Pakistan, the government under Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif denied any involvement in the attack. They labeled TRF an independent insurgent group and criticized India for jumping to conclusions. However, internally, panic began to set in. International pressure began mounting. The United States, United Nations, Russia, and the EU called for restraint. China, a strategic partner to both countries, remained largely silent, but deployed observers to the UN Security Council sessions. India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar led a diplomatic blitzkrieg. In a matter of days, he briefed top officials in Washington, Brussels, Tokyo, and Tel Aviv, presenting classified evidence linking the attackers to Pakistan's deep state. Satellite photos, digital footprints, and recovered audio logs were shared confidentially. A new narrative emerged globally, that of India acting in self-defense against organized cross-border terrorism. India's civil society, political leaders across party lines, and public figures united in rare consensus. Candlelight vigils were held in memory of the Pahalgam victims. Bollywood stars, cricketers, and tech leaders joined the wave of patriotic calls for justice. Hashtags like Pahalgam Massacre and India Will Respond trended across all platforms. The media carried grim reports from the valley while asking a common question: when will India strike back? And then came the whispers of war. What began as an act of terror was now becoming a regional flashpoint. The Indian government was working on its war room plans, multi-target, non-nuclear, high-precision retaliation operations that would punish Pakistan but avoid all-out war. The military termed this doctrine strategic depth with controlled escalation. It would focus on surgical strikes, special ops, drone deployments, and cyber warfare while avoiding major civilian centers. Operation Sindoor was being born in secrecy. Part 1 ends here, not in resolution, but on the brink of action. Stay with FutureWay for Part 2, where we will uncover the chilling details of India's precision strikes deep inside Pakistani territory, the unprecedented dogfights in the sky, and how the world's most advanced defense systems were tested in real time. This is truth from the front lines. This is FutureWay. Operation Sindoor, launched by India on May 7, 2025, marked a significant escalation in the ongoing tensions between India and Pakistan. This military operation was a direct response to the April 22nd massacre in Pahalgam, where 26 Indian tourists were killed in an attack attributed to Pakistan-based militant groups. India's strategic response. The Indian government, under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, authorized precision airstrikes targeting 9 locations in Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. These sites were identified as training and logistics bases for terrorist organizations such as Jaish-e-Mohammed, GM, and Lashkar-e-Taiba, LT. The Indian Air Force employed Rafale fighter jets equipped with scalp missiles and AASM hammer bombs, along with Sky Striker loitering munitions, to execute the strikes. Notably, Abdul Rafazar, a top commander of GM involved in several high-profile terrorist activities, was reportedly killed during these operations. Foreign Secretary Sri Vikram Misri emphasized that the operation was focused, measured, and non-escalatory, aiming solely at terrorist infrastructure without targeting civilian or military installations. Pakistan's retaliation. In response, Pakistan launched drone and missile attacks on Indian military targets, including bases in Jammu, Udhampur, and Pathankot. Pakistan claimed to have shot down 5 Indian fighter jets and multiple drones, though India denied these assertions. The Pakistani military also reported civilian casualties resulting from the Indian strikes and vowed to retaliate, raising concerns about a potential escalation into a broader conflict. International reactions and diplomatic efforts. The international community expressed deep concern over the escalating conflict. The United States, United Kingdom, and Gulf states urged both nations to exercise restraint and engage in diplomatic dialogue. While the U.S. historically played a mediating role in such crises, its influence has waned due to strained relations with Pakistan. India, on its part, abstained from voting on Pakistan's bailout package at the International Monetary Fund, citing concerns over the misuse of funds for terrorism. Domestic measures and public sentiment. Within India, the government took several measures to ensure national security and public safety. The Ministry of Defense empowered the Army Chief to call up territorial Army personnel, and high-level security meetings were convened to assess preparedness. States like Maharashtra and Gujarat reviewed their security readiness, and the Indian Premier League 2025 was suspended indefinitely due to the tensions. Public sentiment in India largely supported the government's actions, with prominent figures like cricketer Virat Kohli expressing solidarity with the armed forces. Conclusion. Operation Sindoor represents a significant moment in the India-Pakistan conflict, highlighting the fragile security situation in the region. While both nations have so far avoided a full-scale war, the potential for further escalation remains high. The international community continues to advocate for diplomatic solutions to prevent a humanitarian crisis and maintain regional stability. Real India-Pakistan conflict update. In April 2025, a terror attack in Pahalgam, Jammu and Kashmir, triggered serious diplomatic and military tension between India and Pakistan. India accused Pakistan of direct involvement through proxy actors and state support. In retaliation, India launched strong diplomatic countermeasures. Pakistani envoys were expelled, trade links were frozen, and cooperation under key treaties was suspended. The Indian military heightened its alert level along the line of control, LOC, resulting in intense border skirmishes and drone activity. Pakistan responded with similar aggression, escalating the situation further. International actors including the United Nations, the United States, and Russia called for immediate de-escalation. However, both nuclear-armed nations remain in a high alert posture. No formal war has been declared, but the risk of further escalation remains present. Civilians on both sides of the border have been displaced due to artillery exchange. Humanitarian concerns are growing, with key global powers urging dialogue over conflict. India continues internal investigations, and military surveillance has been increased across the region, while Pakistan has denied state involvement. As of now, no full-scale war has broken out, but diplomatic and military pressure continues to intensify. Global reaction and strategic tensions. As tensions rose following the April 2025 Pahalgam terror attack, the geopolitical environment across South Asia shifted significantly. India responded to the attack with severe diplomatic and military steps, accusing Pakistan of sponsoring cross-border terrorism. Pakistan denied these allegations, insisting it had no role in the violence. In response to India's actions, including the expulsion of diplomats, halting of trade routes, and partial freezing of the Indus Waters Treaty, international concern deepened. The United Nations issued formal statements urging both countries to show restraint, emphasizing the dangers of conflict between two nuclear-armed nations. The United States, China, and Russia held urgent back-channel talks to de-escalate the crisis, while foreign embassies in both countries issued advisories for their citizens to remain alert or evacuate border zones. Simultaneously, satellite images revealed mobilizations on both sides of the line of control, LOC, including the movement of infantry, artillery, and short-range missile systems. Reports confirmed increased drone surveillance and electronic jamming activity, with India strengthening its northern border defense grid and Pakistan increasing air patrols across sensitive air corridors. Both nations have intensified cybersecurity efforts, as government networks and military systems came under targeted cyber attacks, suspected to be state-sponsored. Meanwhile, large-scale evacuations have started across frontline villages in Jammu and Kashmir and areas close to the Pakistani Punjab and Sindh provinces. Civil society groups and humanitarian organizations like the Red Cross have raised concerns about refugee movement and civilian casualties if a broader conflict erupts. While no declaration of war has occurred, many analysts consider the situation to be at its highest tension point since the Kargil conflict in 1999. The Indian Prime Minister reaffirmed that counter-terrorism operations will not be compromised, whereas Pakistani officials reiterated their readiness to respond to any threat to their sovereignty. The international community continues to pressure both sides to engage diplomatically, but internal politics, media rhetoric, and cross-border incidents remain a serious barrier to peace. Internal reactions and global strategy. As the India-Pakistan conflict unfolded in 2025, internal political reactions in both countries were fierce. In India, political leaders rallied the nation under the banner of counterterrorism, solidifying public support for aggressive defense measures. Meanwhile, Pakistan's leadership maintained its stance of non-involvement in terrorism, but prepared for a possible military response. The Pakistani military strategy focused on deterrence, deploying more forces in strategic regions. On the global front, military strategists from NATO and Russia analyzed the balance of power in South Asia, with particular focus on nuclear deterrence. Analysts noted the rising concern about regional security and the stability of global markets, especially in sectors reliant on trade through the region. The UN Security Council called for urgent peace talks, but the risk of military escalation loomed large. Simultaneously, the economic consequences of the conflict became increasingly evident. Both India and Pakistan suffered losses in trade, with industries in Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab especially affected. Pakistan's economy also felt the strain of international sanctions, leading to calls for a diplomatic resolution from within the country's economic circles. Looking ahead, experts projected that both nations would likely engage in back-channel diplomacy, though the outcomes remained uncertain. Military posturing continued, but the possibility of a broader war was tempered by both countries' awareness of the devastating consequences. Potential outcomes and long-term consequences. As the India-Pakistan conflict unfolds, several potential outcomes could shape the region's future. Diplomatic channels could open, driven by global pressures, but military escalation remains a persistent threat. The international community, especially nations with stakes in the region like China and the United States, will play pivotal roles in either promoting peace or further destabilizing the area. Economically, both nations are likely to face long-term repercussions, with sanctions potentially crippling industries and trade. Domestically, the socio-political landscape in both countries may shift dramatically, with military budgets being prioritized over social programs. The global economy may also feel the effects due to disrupted supply chains, particularly in defense and technology sectors. Experts are already contemplating the future of South Asian geopolitics, with the possibility of a peace accord, but the long-term stability of the region is still uncertain. Both countries will need to balance military preparedness with diplomatic engagement to ensure the survival of both their economies and sovereignty. Future scenarios and recommendations. Potential scenarios. 1. Diplomatic resolution. The most optimistic scenario, this would involve both India and Pakistan engaging in structured diplomatic talks under international mediation, such as by the United Nations or neutral countries like Norway or Switzerland. These talks would aim to address core issues like the Kashmir dispute and cross-border terrorism. The involvement of major powers, including the US, Russia, and China, could bring pressure and incentives to resolve tensions peacefully. Economic incentives or trade agreements could be used as leverage to encourage compromise. 2. Prolonged standoff. If diplomatic efforts fail, the situation might not escalate to full-scale war, but rather remain in a prolonged standoff. Skirmishes and military operations would continue at the border, leading to instability, but stopping short of an all-out conflict. While this would not result in a massive loss of life, the economic and psychological toll on both populations could be devastating. The continued border tension would also prevent any meaningful development in the region and keep the military forces in a constant state of alert, draining resources. 3. Full-scale conflict. The worst-case scenario would be a dramatic escalation into a full-scale war. Given both nations' nuclear capabilities, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for the subcontinent, but for global security. Escalation could occur due to miscommunication, provocative actions by militants, or accidents during skirmishes. A broader war would likely involve heavy civilian casualties, widespread infrastructure damage, and a humanitarian crisis. The global community would have to respond with urgent diplomatic and military interventions to try and halt the fighting before it becomes an uncontrollable nuclear conflict. Recommendations for de-escalation and peace. 1. Re-establish communication channels. Diplomatic and military communication lines must be reopened immediately. These channels allow for real-time exchanges of information, which can prevent misunderstandings and reduce the risk of accidental escalation. Regularized meetings between military leaders could provide critical de-escalation opportunities in the event of a military standoff. Given the volatile situation, this step is essential for preventing small skirmishes from spiraling into larger conflicts. 2. International mediation. External mediation by neutral parties is crucial in helping both India and Pakistan find common ground. The United Nations could facilitate structured peace talks, possibly with the backing of countries like China, the US, or the EU, who have vested interests in regional stability. Neutral third parties can also provide a sense of impartiality that might help both nations move beyond their entrenched positions and address critical issues. Confidence-building measures, such as the reduction of military activities near the border, would help create the environment needed for these discussions to succeed. For 3, address root causes. To avoid recurrent tensions, the underlying causes of the conflict, particularly the Kashmir dispute and cross-border terrorism, must be addressed directly. The Kashmir issue, which has been a point of contention since 1947, needs a political resolution that involves both regional autonomy and security assurances. Likewise, tackling cross-border terrorism and ensuring the cessation of militant activities would require both nations to cooperate on intelligence sharing and border security. While these issues are deeply entrenched, a multilateral approach that includes diplomatic, security, and economic measures could pave the way for long-term peace. In times when life feels overwhelming, it's important to remember that you're not alone. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought in silence, and even the smallest act of kindness can make a world of difference. If you're struggling or simply need someone to listen, take a moment to reflect and reach out. Share your thoughts, your feelings, or even your story. You never know who might need to hear your words. Together, we can help each other heal, one conversation at a time. Reach out. We're here for you. Sometimes silence screams the loudest. In a world full of noise, it's the quiet pain that often goes unnoticed. The tears no one sees. The battles no one knows. Behind every smile may lie a storm, and behind every brave face, a heart quietly breaking. This is for the souls carrying invisible wounds, for those who feel forgotten in a crowd. If you're reading this and your heart feels heavy, you're not alone. This space is for you to feel, to heal, and to be heard.